All right, let's talk about a date that's etched into history. A date many of us think we know inside and out, India's Independence Day. We're going to dive deep into this because the real story is so much more complex and frankly more fascinating than what we're often taught. So, let me ask you this. What if the day celebrated with so much joy and patriotism is, when seen from another powerful angle, a day of immense tragedy? And look, this isn't just about flipping a date on a calendar. This is about the very soul of a nation, how it remembers its past, and how it defines who it is. Yep, you heard that right. There's a really compelling case, built on the work of scholars like Dr. Baidya, that India's true, uncompromised moment of freedom actually happened almost 4 years earlier. We're talking December 30, 1943. And what this sets up is this incredible contrast, a day of absolute declared sovereignty versus the day forever linked with the sorrow of partition. Okay, so let's jump in our time machine and head back to 1943. We're going to unpack this incredible and often overlooked chapter in the fight for freedom. This is the story of a completely different kind of independence. And at the absolute center of this story is one man, Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose. He was a leader with this intense, unwavering vision. For him, freedom had to be total, complete, and on India's terms, no negotiations, no compromises, and no leftover colonial baggage. For him, there was no middle ground. So, how did this all go down? Well, in October of 1943, Bose forms the Provisional Government of Free India, also known as Azad Hind. Then comes the game changer. Japan hands over control of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And then, on that pivotal day, December 30th, Bose goes there and raises the Indian flag, declaring it the very first piece of liberated Indian soil. I mean, this wasn't just symbolic. This was real, a piece of India, free. And that's the key thing to remember here. This wasn't just for show. The Azad Hind was a legitimate, functioning government. I mean, think about it. It had its own cabinet making decisions, its own currency being used, a civil code, and a serious fighting force in the Indian National Army. It even got diplomatic recognition from 9 other countries. This was the real deal. And this all points to a really powerful idea, unambiguous sovereignty. Think of it this way. It's the difference between being given your freedom by your colonizer and simply taking it. This was a unilateral declaration. It was India, through its own government, seizing its own destiny, period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, we have to talk about how he did this, because, yeah, it was definitely controversial. Bose operated on a very pragmatic principle. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. He allied with Axis powers like Japan and Germany. For Bose, the math was simple. The British had bled India dry for centuries, and any power that helped him kick them out was a tool to be used for that one singular goal. Okay, so now let's pivot to the date we all know, August 15, 1947. Let's look at why, from this alternative viewpoint, it's seen not as a day of pure celebration, but one of profound grief. And this right here really lays it all out, side by side. On one hand, 1943 was a bold declaration for a united India, achieved through struggle. On the other, 1947 was a negotiated transfer of power, a deal made with the British. It started as a dominion, which is a fancy way of saying the British monarch was still the head of state. A total break? Not quite. And, most tragically, it was defined by the bloody partition of the country. To really grasp the tragedy of 1947, you have to start with the numbers. And they are just staggering. Somewhere between 12 and 20 million people were uprooted from their homes. It was one of the largest, most chaotic, and most painful migrations in all of human history. Just try to picture that. But honestly, even a number that huge can't tell the whole story. The partition unleashed an absolute firestorm of violence. Entire trains full of refugees were attacked. They became known as death trains. Massacres, riots, the human cost was just beyond catastrophic. It carved a wound into the subcontinent that, you could argue, has never fully healed. And the chaos didn't stop there. It wasn't just about drawing lines on a map. Imagine trying to slice a living, breathing country in two. You're splitting everything. The army, the navy, the entire civil service that runs the country, even the railway system and the money in the treasury. It was a messy, brutal divorce that sowed the seeds of conflict for decades to come. So you might be thinking, can a country just change its Independence Day? Well, it's actually not as rare as you might think. Let's look at a few other places around the world to see how nations are constantly evolving their own stories. Let's look at the Philippines, for example. For years, they celebrated the day the U.S. recognized their independence. But then, they changed it to an earlier date when they first declared freedom from Spain. They chose to celebrate the moment of self-liberation. Or Kazakhstan, which added a Republic Day to honor its own declaration of sovereignty. Or Ghana, which created a Founders Day. Nations do this all the time. They refine their story. And what all of this shows us is that history isn't some dusty old book sitting on a shelf. It's alive. It's a conversation. And as nations grow and change, they often look back and choose to celebrate the moments that truly reflect their spirit and their deepest values. And that really gets to the core of this whole debate. What actually makes a nation? Is it just the lines drawn on a map? Or is it something much, much deeper? So the argument, when you boil it all down, is this. 1943 represented the idea of a whole India, not just a political state, but a single cultural and spiritual homeland, an idea that was then violently torn apart by the political decisions and the hastily drawn lines of 1947. There's a quote that just nails this point perfectly. It reminds us that India's identity goes back thousands of years, way before any colonizers arrived. It's a civilization, a vibrant tapestry of cultures that shaped billions of lives. The partition wasn't just a political event. It was a deep tear in that ancient fabric. So what's the takeaway here? What does it actually mean to rethink this date? Well, first, it's about acknowledging that there wasn't just one single path to freedom. Second, it's about making our national memory bigger, more inclusive. And finally, it's about honoring a moment that stood for a pure, powerful, and uncompromised vision of what India could be. And this all leaves us with one last big question to chew on. A national holiday is so much more than a day off work. It's the story a country tells itself, about itself. So what should that story celebrate? A legal date that came with tragedy and compromise? Or a foundational ideal, the moment a dream of pure freedom was first declared? And how a country answers that, well, that doesn't just define its past. It charts the course for its future.